This week's episode of our show has been sponsored by the fantastic cartographers Chepeku.
Chepeku makes high-quality fantasy maps for Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, or all of your TTRPG needs. With their catalog of over 4,000 maps, you can really find anything you might need for your games.
These maps are seriously gorgeous with tons of variation. I've gone through their archive and found maps including everything that I need for dungeon crawls, taverns, and all those classic locations, but also wild and outlandish places like kobold breweries or the skull of an elder brain. What's even better about all of Chepeku's maps is that they all have different color variants, such as things like different seasons or different times of day and night, which really makes their maps super useful and fantastic for integrating into whatever your favorite VTT is.
All of their maps are VTT ready. You can use them with Roll20, Fantasy Grounds, or any of your favorite VTT platforms. For simply jumping on their Patreon, you're going to have thousands and thousands of maps all ready for you to use, plus access to all of the future maps that they make, and they put out a lot of maps.
If you're a game master having a little bit of writer's block for what your next adventure is going to be, just going on an archive binge through their maps is almost sure to give you inspiration and give you the perfect map to use for your next adventure. So head on over to patreon.com/Chepeku or follow the links in the description below, sign up for their Master Cartographer membership level, and access their entire catalog.
And now, let's get on with the episode.
Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. And today we're going to talk about how Kelly and I use a unique variant on Session Zero that we call Session Rezero in our games.
The Session Rezero is a great way to get the team back on the same page. Perhaps you're playing a very long campaign, and this might be the right time to make sure that everybody still has the same ideas in mind, that they know exactly what the campaign is about, that all of their characters are on the right paths, and that you're all heading in the same and right direction.
Kelly and I have been using Session Rezeros multiple times over the years, but in particular in our actual play campaign, Dungeons of Drakkenheim, and its follow-up campaigns, Shadows and Fate of Drakkenheim. And we found the Session Rezero to be a really amazing tool at making our campaigns consistent, bringing all the players and the game masters on the same page, and for myself as a GM, at helping make sure that I can keep the game fresh and focused on the characters. So we're going to tell you about how this works today, how we've used it, and give you some tips and tricks on why you might want to use it yourself in your games.
There's a lot to discuss today, so let's get rolling.
So you're probably familiar with a Session Zero. We've discussed it on the channel here before, and if you want more information on what a Session Zero is and how to use it, you can check out our guide to that right up over here.
But a Session Rezero is something that you're going to not be doing at the very beginning or outset of your campaign like a Session Zero. This is something that's going to happen mid-campaign. It's a mid-campaign check-in, an opportunity to review how the campaign is going, recap the story so far, and discuss the character's goals as the campaign heads towards its next plot arc.
Like a Session Zero, a Session Rezero can be as detailed as you want it to be for the needs of your group. Oftentimes, we've done Session Rezeros over Discord chat or over a Zoom call outside of our regular game sessions, but we've also done them as an hour or two discussion before we jump back into a campaign. And in our own long-running campaigns, we have had multiple Session Rezeros in our games. And so when you might want to do one is, in our experience, it works really, really well if you've just finished a major story arc in your campaign and you want to discuss what's next for the characters.
Another time that you might want to do a Session Rezero is if your campaign has been on a long pause or hiatus and you're starting up again. I know that for myself, a lot of times it's quite difficult to get a group of friends together to play consistently, especially around the holidays or various other points where a lot of things are going on. During the holidays recently, my group had a lot of other commitments with families and traveling, and so we haven't played in 3 to 4 months now. We're going to be getting started back up again, and I'm planning a session ReZero for all of us to be refreshed on what the campaign is about, who our characters are, and what's going on.
A session ReZero is also really, really useful if you've had multiple new players join or leave your group over the course of the campaign. In fact, I recommend if you are having a new player, particularly one who has never played a TTRPG or D&D before, joining an existing D&D group, you really want to do a session ReZero to integrate them into your group, particularly if there's someone that is joining your social dynamic for the first time. I find in my experience that onboarding a new player into an existing campaign can often be one of the hardest experiences for that person as far as getting into D&D. And for some people, it can be it's very common for that to be a negative experience. And so having a session ReZero is a really gracious opportunity to bring that new player in and give them the full session zero experience. It's doubly helpful as well if you have a high level campaign and you're inviting a first time player into that campaign where there's tons of stuff that they have to know to go on. Overall, in my opinion, bringing a brand new player who's never played D&D before into a high level existing campaign is never the most ideal situation as a new player experience, but having a session zero really smooths out the wrinkles of that process.
And finally, if like us, your campaign spans several years, you may want to just treat this as a checkup session. Perhaps once a year, you get everybody together and just rediscuss the ongoing events of the campaign.
The notion of a session ReZero really shouldn't feel too unfamiliar to everybody. I think that it's pretty normal for most long-running D&D groups to do regular recaps, check-ins, and meetings to talk about things like the schedule and how the campaign is going. Usually these conversations often happen at the beginning or the end of another regular game session. Much of the same way that a session zero is really just intentionally putting all those pre-game discussions that happen in a dedicated session, the session ReZero works much the same way. And so the benefits of doing this is that it's going to keep everybody in your group on the same page as the campaign progresses, especially on an organizational front. As I'm sure anyone who has experienced a long-running D&D campaign understands, people's lives change. Our friends have moved to different houses, changed jobs, had babies, graduated from school, changed where the campaign was being played, and so many life changes can happen to people over the course of a long-running campaign that sometimes it might turn out that you find, like us, turns out Tuesday nights doesn't work well anymore for everyone in the group. So you might want to find another day in the schedule. Maybe someone else is going to need to host the game. All these organizational things, it's a great way to intentionally discuss them and find a new way of going forward.
One of the other really important benefits of the session ReZero is that it's a chance for you as the DM to learn what's most important to the players. As the narrative of the campaign progresses, oftentimes the goals of the players can change. What a player's goals are at level 1 might be pretty basic. They might be a rough idea on how they're going to connect to the campaign. But as you start dealing with the events of the campaign, they might acquire new goals or new adventures that they want to set out on. So having this discussion and letting the players discuss what it is that's most important to them and their characters will help you push the narrative forward.
Also, a session ReZero is a really good opportunity to just remind your players about the important plot points, locations, and non-player characters that they've met. A Dungeons & Dragons campaign, especially one that's been running for a long time, can become a bit of a sprawling mess with all of the NPCs, places, quests, and events that occur over the course of the campaign. And so a session ReZero is a really great way to zoom out and remind your players, yeah, you met the king of so-and-so land, and you actually do know the merchants of Ur-Zur, and you owe them a bunch of money for those magic items that you bought. And you might want to remind yourselves that you did let that villain escape that one time, and that you're not really welcome amongst the elves of the magical forest anymore because of the thing that the dwarf said to the elf queen. So being able to go over these plot points and things that they might have forgot about as human beings, but that their characters would absolutely still remember, is a really, really critical element of a session re-zero, and can bring sort of that detritus and those forgotten things back to the forefront as your campaign moves on to a new plot arc.
I also think that it works both ways in that sense, that you might start talking about the plot points and your players will bring up plot points that you as a DM have forgotten.
It's happened to me a lot.
And then you go, oh, right, that villain did get away and they're not dead and I should probably bring them back.
Or it might turn out that one player has had a lot of time in the spotlight. Their character has evolved a lot over the course of the campaign. They've had a lot of character development. They got a lot of extra magic items and maybe bonus rewards. And maybe one or two of the other players haven't had that opportunity yet. And so it can remind you, oh yeah, this player wrote something in their backstory and I still haven't done anything about that yet. So it lets the players have this opportunity to bring things of their own to the table and talk about what they might want to see and do with their characters as the campaign unfolds.
So with all of that in mind, let's talk about what we should actually discuss in a session re-zero. First and foremost, I think the most important discussion point for a session re-zero is the schedule. How is the current schedule working for everyone? Are you happy with how often you meet to play? Does the day of the week that you've chosen work for you? Or do we need to renegotiate when and how we get together to actually play D&D? I think that scheduling is probably one of the biggest challenges of any D&D group. If you've played D&D, you know this. And discussing the schedule often in session re-zeros is a great way to just stay on top of it, because people's lives change and days of the week that worked at one point might not work for another. Somebody in our group has recently gotten a job that actually makes them pretty busy on weekends. So we're renegotiating if Saturdays were the best day to play or if we should look at a different day of the week.
A lot of groups do try to do this dynamic scheduling thing where they might use something like Doodle or one of those schedule managers, and everyone puts in their availability and they try to schedule around everyone's availability. And I'll just say, in my experience, this is not the best way to do scheduling for D&D groups, at least for me and for our groups. Generally, we recommend, and what has worked for us, is picking a day and time of the week and never changing that time, but simply canceling and trying for next week if not enough players can make it. The reason why we like this method is that over time, everyone knows Sunday night, like Sunday afternoon, Saturday night, Tuesday evening, that's D&D night. And people learn to prioritize the game within their schedule. I prefer generally playing with people who are going to prioritize the game to a certain extent. And so that's kind of, I will admit for myself, that has kind of been the filter on how I've formed long-term groups, where people who couldn't make that consistently left the group over time, and now we're kind of left with a group of people that can always prioritize that time. It's up to you to find what works best for you. But just as a note, if you've got a long-standing group, I've found for any group that I've done a session re-zero with, it's usually been a group that picked a day and stuck with it.
I find one thing that we're trying, because again, when you're all adults, it is quite difficult to do that. I do find that what I've started to do with my group is we have given a 3-day window. So it's Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Yeah. And we will say Sunday's the ideal day, but if we can't do it, can everybody do Saturday or Monday, one of the opposite days? If the answer is yes, we'll shift by a day to either end. So we're trying for a certain day of the week, but if we can't, instead of going 3 or 4 weeks without playing, we'll see if one of the other days works.
Every group is ultimately going to find their own scheduling method. And do you cancel if 1 or 2 people can't make it, or do you play with whoever can show up? Every group's going to find your own method. And that's why it's important to discuss it during session re-zero so that the expectations are clear no matter what way works for your group. Your group will find something that ultimately works for them or sort of kind of works. But if the scheduling method is frustrating you, it's worth discussing it because there could be a better way of handling it. By a similar token, you might also need to discuss snacks, who's hosting, where you're playing. Maybe you're even considering shifting from playing in person to playing online. I think that this is another example of a big shift. Maybe over time, your group has moved away. People have moved across the country, maybe to a different country entirely. People are now in different time zones, and you're even considering moving to playing online or moving to play, or vice versa. Maybe you were playing online for many, many years because of recent events, and now you're coming back into playing in person. That's a perfect excuse to have a session ReZero and a big thing to discuss as part of it.
I also think that perhaps some groups might be interested in shifting up the dynamic of who is the dungeon master and who the players are. A session ReZero might be a great option for groups that are switching out who the DM is. Perhaps the DM's gotten a little bogged down with the role of being a DM, and one of the players has voiced interest in wanting to DM. If you're doing a campaign where you have a shifting DM, which I've heard of several times, a session ReZero can help establish and make sure everybody's on the same page as you make that transition.
I'll just say for myself, the forever DM mindset is a prison that our own mind creates for ourselves. If you're the dungeon master and you really are itching for the chance to play, a session ReZero is the perfect chance to bring that up to your group and say to your group, hey, I would like to get on the other side of the screen. Who's willing to do that? Because I'm not DMing the next arc. And so if no one is willing to do it, then I guess we're not playing. By a similar token, many people are considering trying new RPGs and new systems. And if you have an existing long-standing group, a session ReZero could be the opportunity to discuss converting your existing campaign to a different system or trying out other games and building those into your schedule as well.
However, if you are the DM, you're going to want to prepare several things for your session ReZero. First and foremost is a list of questions for the players to answer. Monty has his own list that he sends to all of us when we are doing a session ReZero, and you will probably have a slightly different list. We're going to go over what questions Monty asks in a minute, but I think that the list is going to change depending on every group.
You'll also want to have, whether you're the player or a DM coming into this, it's worth thinking about the plot points that have happened so far. What are the major things that you, kind of the executive summary of your story? Think of it if you had to tell like that high level movie pitch version of what has happened so far in your campaign.
Previously on.
Yes, previously on, or the story so far, or if you were making a recap episode, right? That sort of episode that where if you've got a TV series that has had multiple seasons and the new season is starting back up again, this is kind of the recap episode. Put together something like that. Also, you'll want to have your thoughts collected on organizational matters. You might want to come in knowing what your work schedule is like, knowing what sort of commitments you have coming up. You know, if there are going to be some major life changes coming up for people in your group, you want to have those going in mind going into a session ReZero. So in reviewing the story so far, some of the questions that I like to bring to the group, and often I will share these questions before the session ReZero with the players, include some of the following.
What have the characters achieved? This is going to be a look at the recent story arc or the recent few story arcs and discussing what your character has accomplished within those story arcs.
And also, how does your character feel about what they've achieved? To what extent have they been changed by the events of the campaign? Maybe your character started out with a certain ideal, bond, or flaw, or maybe a particular alignment even. And over the course of the campaign, you realize, actually, you know, when I made this character, I really thought of them as a lawful good person, but I've realized that over the course of the campaign, they're really more chaotic good. And that's a change that has happened with the experiences they've had. This is a great moment to reflect on.
What locations, treasures, secrets, and non-player characters are most important to the player? Oftentimes, player characters will gravitate towards certain NPCs, or a certain character will pick up a great magical flaming sword and create an instant and long-lasting connection with that magic item. It's important to discuss these because those discussions can tell the DM what NPCs to bring back into play more often, and whether or not the magic item should maybe play a bigger role in the campaign.
Speaking of magic items, one thing that our group finds all the time is the players forget forget what they have in their inventory, or maybe even forget what spells they've chosen. And so there can be a mechanical component to a session ReZero where you just go through the party inventory and kind of do that bookkeeping of like, how much? Oh, wait, we have 20,000 gold, everybody. When did we get that airship? Who actually has the bag of tricks and the immovable
We have a
rod?
new wand of healing?
Yeah, exactly. And so sometimes you can find out, it's like, oh, we actually never decided who was going to take the +3 shield that we found as part of the Dragon's Hoard. And so the session ReZero can be that opportunity to even just go through all the treasure that you found and make sure that you have the rules for them, make sure who actually possesses them. Even as an extension of this, a session ReZero can also be an opportunity to give the player characters the opportunity to retrain their characters or even change their characters out entirely. Maybe you come to a session ReZero and go, you know what? My character has achieved everything they wanted to achieve. They're going to move on. And I'm going to bring in a new character.
Also questions like, what are the character's goals and what do they want to do next? These often go hand in hand, but every character is going to have a set of goals that can adapt and change throughout the campaign. And what they want to do next might be determined by those goals. Obviously, in some campaigns, the DM might have a little bit more of a linear structure that they're going on, but it still is important to ask the characters, what is it that they're looking to accomplish and how might they go about that? The DM might have input to help steer them towards the plot points of the campaign. If the plot is that you're supposed to be going into the Underdark, then the DM's probably going to say, we're heading into the Underdark, but how do you guys want to go about getting there?
This is also a great opportunity for you to be sneaky as a DM and ask your players, what do you think is going to happen next? And then put on your best poker face and listen really, really carefully while you actually write down the ideas that they have. Because for me, this is the real gem of the session ReZero, is when the players start telling you what they expect is going to happen or what they think would be really cool about happening next. They're basically giving you a laundry list of surefire ways to engage and excite them in what is coming up. If one of your players says like, oh man, I've really heard about this dragon that lives under the mountain and it would be really cool if we could make an alliance with them, and you had not even considered that could be a possibility, well, now you're going to be able to prepare for that. And you're going to be able to think about how that could unfold or how that could happen. If the players are talking about doing some really wild and crazy things like teleporting across to the other end of the world or going to another plane of existence or drawing up an alliance with the Lich and using that undead army as a distraction for some sort of great battle, these are all things that you might not have considered before. And when the players talk about these aspirations, it's really giving you ammunition and material to work with as you prepare the next arc of the campaign. So never turn down the opportunity for your players to do the work for you.
At the same point, talking about the plot points of the previous threads that might still be hanging there. So are you forgetting anything important? Identify loose threads or unresolved storylines. Again, both the players and the DMs might have some elements that they want to bring to the table here. Players are going to remember loose threads that were important to them. Where is the rattling submarine? We want to know. So when you bring that to the table and continually bring it up in all of your session ReZeros, eventually your DM's going to get the hint that you should bring back the rattling submarine.
I don't know where the rattling submarine is. I don't know where the rattling submarine is.
Well,
you know what? Like so many times I've done these session ReZeros and like the thing comes back, like the rattling submarine. It's just like, I don't know when I'm going to bring that back in. And you might not. You just might not. And then one day you go, actually, this is the perfect opportunity. So this is the whole thing. Is like, I really like to have a bit of an economy with my plots and my storylines. And I find that the session ReZero is really useful because it tells you what are the things that you did previously that you can kind of reuse and recycle. And I do find for myself as a DM and as a storyteller, you get a lot more out of using another NPC again in a new context than you might from inventing a brand new one from whole cloth. And especially when it's a callback or something that the characters can see the progression, it makes the world feel like a living, breathing place that you're running into all these people again and again. And it helps the players build those connections and establish like that the world is a place that exists. They're not always going to a new place where nothing mattered from the previous location at all. And so, you know, when your players bring up a rattling submarine, you better find a way to bring the rattling submarine back.
The other questions to finish this off is, how does the game feel? Does everyone enjoy the theme, tone, and difficulty of the game? This is a great time to reevaluate sort of the intensity of your game. Are you playing on hard mode and the players are actually finding it to be very stressful? I remember we were doing a campaign once where so many times at the table, because we were making so many executive decisions that had a lot of weight in the campaign setting, and the lives of thousands of NPCs rested on our decisions. And we were actually standing at the table screaming at each other because we were disagreeing on what the right course of actions was. And people were like, no, too many people are going to die if we do that, but it's our best way to do. It actually got to the point where I was leaving games kind of stressed out.
Yeah.
And I remember our group being like, Monty, we might need a little bit more of a linear arc for a few bits just to get calm back down and enjoy killing monsters.
Yeah, I mean, that even happened in our own Drakenheim campaign, where it was like we were going really heavy on the political intrigue for a little while. And when we had that session ReZero, it was like, we kind of just want to focus on exploring some cool locations and dealing with the consequences and doing those things, and recognizing that, like, doing session after session after session of political debate was not really what we wanted to be doing, and that it felt like we had to do it because that felt really important. But what we wanted to do was get out into the world and explore all these cool things and fight cool monsters. So sometimes it is possible for your campaign to get into a little bit of that rut. People are missing certain things, like being able to fight monsters and explore dungeons and have something that maybe is a little bit more contained. It might be the opposite as well. Maybe your group comes to it and be like, hey, you know what? All we've been doing has been crawling through these dungeons, and it doesn't really feel like anything matters. We really want to have a little bit more time to maybe build our own base up and, you know, rebuild that tavern and have that downtime. So this is the opportunity for the players to say, this is what we would like to do, what we're interested in doing, and for the dungeon master to get that opportunity to tailor the campaign going forward to give them those chances.
So for the players, we're going to discuss the actual questions that Monty handed to us for our session ReZero. Again, these questions might look different depending on the campaign you're running, what's involved in it, what the current arcs or plot lines are, and who your players are. The first question that Monty sent us is, who are the top 3 NPCs that you would want your characters to interact with in the upcoming season?
I asked this because, again, I wanted to know which NPCs I should be bringing back and which NPCs my players enjoyed, which they liked, and I got great answers from this. There was a couple where everyone had the same ones, and then you have to bring that NPC back for something. And then everyone often bringing in characters from their own backstories and things like that they wanted to interact with.
The next question, what is your character most afraid of or concerned about right now?
This turned out to be a pretty nebulous question. I got pretty nebulous answers to it, so I don't know if I would ask this one again in the future, but it did give me some ideas for ways to shake things up and maybe scare the players with some unexpected events.
What do they want to do about it?
This was much more helpful, because this was when the answers that I got from you guys were much more in lines of, I would like to go to this location and interact with this NPC and do this thing. And so I was actually able to build some adventure arcs just from this question alone.
Is there an element of your character's personality, backstory, or goals you'd like to develop or explore more over the next season?
This is one of those questions where different types of players are going to answer this question in very different ways. Kelly, you were very concrete when you answered this question. You were like, I want to do this. I want to have this happen. I'm really interested in this. And it was like, okay, well, based on your answer alone, we could have very easily done countless sessions. Whereas the answers that I got from Joe and Jill were much more open-ended on this front. And I think that comes from me looking at different styles of my players and assessing that. I know that, Kelly, you often have a very clear vision in mind for what you want your characters to be. Whereas Joe and Jill are much more, I want to find out. And I just want to interact with interesting things. And so the answers that I got from Joe in particular were like, I just want more interactions with my Warlock's patron. I just want to get into more trouble with my magic sword, right? And it was much more about the individual interplay in the moment rather than like this big meta storyline. So you're going to get different answers from different players because you're going to have some players that are very focused in finding out how their character grows and other players who are very, very interested in growing their character in a specific way.
Are there any cinematic moments in your imagination you'd love to see your character do next season? I think, again, me being very specific, I have a lot of cinematic moments. My brain works in this way that when my character is accomplishing anything, even in the last couple sessions that we ran, I already have images in my head of like this animated version of the climax for Sebastian Crow and what that looks like. I don't know if that will ever happen, but I think cinematically about a lot of really cool moments that could be upcoming, confronting my greatest foe, facing that big monster that escaped, or saving the person that I've been setting out to save from the beginning of the campaign. All of these moments are cinematic, really exciting things to me. And I try to be specific with my dungeon master about those, because the more specific I am, the more that my dungeon master is then aware of what it is I'm imagining. And no matter what, going back to your previous point, I know that I'm a very specific person, but what I do love is that it's never going to happen exactly the way that I pictured it. A great example, and I won't give too many spoilers here for those of you who are still watching our show, but in Shadows of Drakkenheim, I had a very specific cinematic moment for when Wilhelm reveals a secret.
Yeah.
And when it actually came to that moment, it was a 180 of the story that I told you. And I think I still congratulate you on, instead of giving me exactly what I wanted, you said, Kelly thinks he knows what he wants, but what if we reverse it?
And I think that this is why, as a DM, when your players are telling you what their hopes and dreams for their characters are, the first step is you got to put on a really good poker face and listen carefully to them and ask questions, but resist the temptation to say, it's going to go down this way, right? And I've run into that before because we've often talked about, like, when we've discussed in session zeros, like the dark fantasy tone of Drakkenheim and how the ending might not be totally happy, but that we still want the characters to have satisfying conclusions. I find that I have to walk this very, very tight, this tightrope of saying, like, no, I don't mean that I just want all the characters to die, but I do know that, like, maybe certain things don't work out perfectly in the end. And that there's a certain measure of uncertainty, because I do like grounded stories that kind of end with a little bit of a bittersweet note to them. And so that's a very interesting thing to manage those expectations while listening to all the exciting things that your players want from the campaign.
I think what was important about your reversal, just to speak on that a little bit more, was when you listened to me describe the cinematic moment I wanted to play out, what you were able to capture was what I wanted was the confrontation.
Yeah.
What I cinematically imagined was a conclusion, but not necessarily the conclusion.
Yeah.
And so you presented the conflict, but allowed a different conclusion to occur.
And this is where the other element that I like to add to really capture this is I ask my players, what do you think the most difficult choice your character would have to make would be? Again, I ask this question because I like dark fantasy and I like hard choices. And I like to know what choices my players are scared of having to make so I can ask them to make them.
And that is the point. Don't answer a question as a player that you don't want the answers to.
Yeah, right. I often say, with any player character, if a player character designs a secret for their character, the point of having the secret is that it's revealed. If your character is a lone wolf, the point of playing the lone wolf character is to go on the arc of realizing that your character doesn't like being the lone wolf isn't really the answer. Like, it's about knowing what is the meta plot that you're on. What is kind of the moral of the story or the resolution point, right? You know, if Campbell was telling us the story circle of the campaign, what would be the archetypal story that we were actually following through with this? And I like this kind of analysis because I'm a very literary person and I like these sort of things. And sometimes certain groups don't like to find out. They don't like to have the prescribed ending. And what's really important about this is that you're not prescribing any endings in doing this. What you're doing in this process is you're trying to get ideas for the future so that you hit on beats that people are excited about. This is a tool to increase the engagement and excitement and to make the game more satisfying for everybody. It's not meant to spoil the campaign, and it's not meant to put you on a railroad. It's discussing possibilities and potentialities so that you have a well of ideas to draw upon that are going to be concentrated and meaningful rather than just spinning a tale that isn't the most engaging thing for everybody.
When I say to Monty, I have this cinematic great moment where I want to confront a character from my past at some point in the campaign, Monty knows to build a scenario where we will run into that character. Under what circumstances and how I choose to deal with it will remain up to me, and the player agency still falls on me. Monty's not prescribing any foreseen narrative. He just knows that me as a player would like to confront this NPC, who we haven't run into yet.
Yeah.
So Monty knows that they're going to be in the next arc.
That said, I do like to ask the players, what does a happy ending look like for your characters? If they got a wish, what would they wish for? Sometimes the idea of thinking about what the happy ending for your character is once you've gone partway through the story, I think that a lot of us, when we engage with media and we engage with stories, we get excited thinking about how it could end, how it could all work out. I know that some of my favorite TV shows that I've followed, I've always wondered, where is this going? What is going to happen? And I love doing that exercise of speculating, you know, how is it all going to end? Sometimes I just never know. It's like, I just don't know, right? Sometimes you know that it's got to end a particular way, right? Like you get pretty far enough in Breaking Bad, you know there's only one way out of this one, right? But then it becomes a question of, okay, but you know that is inevitable. But how it's going to go down becomes the question. And so that finding out where it's going to go is supported by having these conversations.
I also think it's important to note that just because you discuss what your happy ending might be, you also need to realize, both as a player and a DM, that the happy ending may not occur. I know what my happy endings are for my characters. Do I think they're going to happen? I hope so.
Yeah.
But I'm not really counting on it. I'm striving for the happy ending, but the campaign might have other ideas for me.
Yeah, and on the notion of ending a long-running campaign is really challenging. And I will say, I think one of the unfortunate truths of any long-standing RPG campaign is that I think far more campaigns fizzle out than they do come to a satisfying conclusion. And one of the things that you might discover in doing a session ReZero is that ending that you thought was a year away, like 50 game sessions away, might actually be a lot closer than you think. And there's something to be said for stepping back and going, okay, this is how we're going to resolve it, right? Sometimes the inverse happens. In one of our session ReZeros, we realized that our player characters in our Drakenheim campaign were getting to level 17, and we were like, you know what? We're going to take this to level 20. And for me, as a DM, that was a really clear sign of like, okay, I know that I've got till level 20 to end this. I know that I want to do about 6 to 8 game sessions per level. And so it gave me a really clear sense of, okay, well, we're level 17 now, we're level 20 now. I got this many game sessions approximately to get there. And these are a bunch of the things that are important to my players. So I better make sure that things are happening now. And so especially for us, where we're on this like epic level final arc, it's really cool to do the session ReZero, because now everything comes up. The personal stories, the resolutions to the quests, and it gets really, really punchy because the stakes get high, things are, high-level spells are being thrown around, plot points are getting resolved, and those loose threads are getting woven back in. Maybe not every loose thread's going to get solved. Not every mystery is going to have an answer. But I think it's going to be a really cool journey along this final arc, and I love that we've used Session ReZero as a tool along the way to make sure that the climax of our campaign can be as exciting as we all want it to be.
So if you have thoughts on the Session ReZero or have ran one yourself, tell us about how that went in the comments below.
The videos that we create on our channel are made possible thanks to the incredible generosity of our Patreon supporters. So if you, like them, enjoy the work that we do here on YouTube, join our Patreon. The links are right down below. Get to be a member of our Discord community, chat with us, engage with us, and help us continue making this awesome content here on YouTube.
And if you want to see the narrative of our characters come to life through many Session ReZeros, you can check out our actual play in the Worlds of Drakenheim, which premieres every Tuesday on YouTube. You can check out all the previous episodes right up over here.
And we've got plenty more advice for game masters right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time in the dungeon.